So hello, everyone. Welcome to call 14 in our Village in the City series. This is about how to create micro-local communities where you live in your neighborhood, and you can do it. And we're going to give you the ideas and the tools and the frameworks and the things to do, and with our website, support connection with other people who are doing the same thing. So today, unusually, the guest speaker is me. So I'm not only the host of the call, I am actually leading the session today. And we're going to talk about hosting community. And hosting is something I've done a lot of work with over the last nearly 2 decades. And I'll tell a story about that in the presentation. So as we go along, do feel free to shout out, folks, if you would like to ask a question, and we'll see how we get on. So I'm sharing the screen now, and there's our website. villageinthecity.net is the first place to call into, and that'll lead you, if you want, to our community website on Mighty Networks, where you can join in with all the fun and excitement. So the very beginning of Village in the City was in the summer of 2020, when I saw that the future was going to be more local than we all supposed it was going to be before the pandemic, and started to think about the importance of micro-local communities. And I sat down and wrote this manifesto with these 6 key elements of a village in the city. And this is not quite the same as the other asset-based community development stuff that you may have seen, but I think it points very much in the same places, but it's a very practical framework. And so these 6 elements are inclusivity. You have to include everyone in the patch. Connection, be that by Facebook group or newsletter or whatever. Hosts, which is what we're going to talk about, and it used in the old days to be the vicar and the pub landlord who are the village hosts, but we need people to step forward, like all of you, to act as hosts in your own neighborhoods now. We need meeting places. We need inclusive gatherings, reasons for people to come together that are for everyone in the neighborhood. And we need, finally, an identity. What makes this a special place? Something to be a little bit proud of, the fact that I live here and I live with my neighbors here. And that develops over time. And the idea is of these 6 elements that they are all interconnected. So that when you work on one of them, you are actually improving the possibilities in all the other ones as well, which is a rather wonderful thing. So the way we advise people to tackle community building is have a look at those 6, see which is the one that seems to need the most attention right now, and start on it. And you will see that, that as you work with that, other possibilities will come. And we also advise people to take a solution-focused approach, which is in that area to see what's already there, and try and build on it if you can, rather than reinventing the wheel all the time. So, for example, I started here in the West End of Edinburgh working with connection. We had no community connection at all. But rather than start my own Facebook group, I went and had a look. And there was already a Facebook group, West End Residents, with 19 people in it. And they'd been on about 19 people for a year. And so I joined, making the 20th person, and made a couple of posts, and then went and had a chat with the guy who was organizing it and said, look, we could expand this. And so we decided to leaflet every letterbox in the West End, and we now have 1,200 members a year and a bit on. So that's, rather than me doing everything, it's about looking around for what's there and building on it. So that's about solution focus, and more of that another time perhaps. But these 6 elements are all connected. The one we're going to talk about today is the element of hosting, and hosts, and how you can be a host in your community. And the good news is you already broadly know how to do it. So here's the story about hosting. But first, a little refresher on some material that's developed by Cormac Russell and others. This is asset-based community development, and his very, very interesting, nice model about the difference between institutions and communities. And in the lingo, they call this the difference between triangles and circles. And it's a great distinction. I really like it. I'm very happy to be sharing it with you. And the way you lead in these 2 things is really different. So here we go. Institutions on the left, triangles, that's a hierarchy. They act by controlling people to deliver things to goods and services to their consumers and customers by staff who are replaceable, who are effectively cogs in a machine, because they have to be, because they're producing the service or good. And they identify needs in their consumer base, and they act by transaction and barter. So the people who are in the organization or the institution work there because they get paid, or they work there, for some other self-interested reason. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's a way of organizing. It's a very widespread way, but it's not the only way of organizing. The other way, or one of the other ways of organizing, is the community, which is on the right-hand side of the diagram, and it's a circle. And the circle, you'll notice, is these are different people in it. In the triangle, the people are all the same because they're replaceable staff. But in the community, everyone's an individual, a named individual. And the community can only act by consent. There's no kind of instructions and directions in a community. You have to co-create your future by doing it together, acting by consent for every citizen in your community. And you do it by building on the assets and gifts that are there in that community. And that's why in the middle of the circle is a gift, a hand with a gift on it. And it's about everybody's gifts coming together. And you don't act because you get paid. You act by commitment. You act by making a promise to your peers to do things because it's good for you and it's good for them and it's good for everybody. So this is not about trying to organize your community as if it was a business or something like that, or a county or a council department or something. That's fine for businesses and council departments. It's about organizing your community as if it was a community, which is in this circle model where everyone who's involved is playing their own role. They're bringing their own passions and gifts and talents and skills. And the way you lead in these two sorts of organization, in the institution, you lead by directing. There's a chair usually, there's a voting process, and there's managing and controlling, and everything's very kind of digital and this or that, and we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. We've made a decision, everybody must do it, and you do it because you're getting paid. Whereas in the community model, we lead by convening. You lead by bringing together, and that is hosting. The act of receiving or entertain guests is what hosting is about. And you don't usually vote on these things. You build broad consensus about what's to be done among the people who want to do it. And so it's about co-creating things and having choice about what you do. You're not constrained by shareholders or managing directors or anything like that. It's a much more organic process, an involving process. And so that's why the idea of hosting fits so powerfully with the community model. And on this call, I'm going to be sharing with you some very key ideas from my book, Host, 6 New Roles of Engagement, which I wrote with Helen Bailey, which is all about how to be a leader and a host at the same time. And this is kind of original work that I've done over the last 2 decades. And I think and I hope that it fits really well into this community setting. So I discovered the idea of hosting as leading in a seminar about family therapy by a German professor in the year 2003. And he is a great friend now, and Matthias Varga, and he, as part of his session on family therapy, said, there's an old Arabic proverb, he said, the host is both the first and the last. The host is both the first and the last. And I thought, that's the leader, isn't it? The leader is the first and the last. And this image came to my mind of the ship's captain being the last off the sinking ship, which I'm sure is an idea you've all come across. And indeed, you find that this idea of going first and going last it encapsulates so much, and it works on so many levels. It works on very practical levels, like if you're hosting a thing, a party, you have to be there first to set it up, and you have to be there last to clean up and turn the lights out. But it also is a much more kind of philosophical level as well, and we can think about going forward to show the way, and also being at the back to make sure no one is left behind. Very powerful leadership image. And there are these two books that have resulted, the host book I just mentioned, and then also the host leadership field book, which is about 30 short chapters of people using hosting as leadership in various contexts around the world. They're both available on Amazon and all through all good bookshops. And the thing that I went off to discover how to be a good host, and I looked for a book, and there wasn't one. Surprisingly, there were books about how to have a tea party, and there were books about how to run a hotel, but nothing in the more general case of what does it mean to be a great host. And so I spent over a decade going around interviewing great hosts and people I thought were great hosts, and also leaders who I thought acted like hosts, although sometimes that idea hadn't struck them. And the book that emerged was a collection of everything I discovered, and it's and one of the things I discovered is that it's an ancient art. Hosting is as old as humanity. Inviting people in is as old as humanity. And this is a picture. One of the groups I spoke to were Bedouins in the desert in Egypt, and they have a hospitality culture. Every time you meet a stranger, you must invite them in, give them tea, give them shelter, no matter who they are. No matter whether they're friend or foe or stranger or your uncle. It's part of how they work. And it works like that in tough situations like the desert and the steppes and the plains and the tundra, because the going is hard. And if you meet another human being, it's your responsibility to offer them some care, because they may perish otherwise. If you go out into the desert today, you will still find Bedouins in camps like this. And this photograph or picture could have been taken 3,000 years ago, apart from the fact that there's a plastic jerry can in it. That's what gives it away. You can't see the Toyota Land Cruiser off to the right-hand side of the picture. But this is a very ancient tradition. And when people traveled in the very old days before there were hotels and things, they knocked on doors and people took them in. That's how we got around. So this hosting is an ancient art, but it's one that we need to reclaim, because hosting for things like staying over is now an industry. It's the hospitality industry. And that's all fine. But we need to think about how we invite and engage people in our communities afresh. Oops, let's go there. And it's not just your friends. When I talk about hosting, people immediately think of like having a party, having a dinner, inviting your friends around. And this is a lovely thing to do, and we all do it, I think. But it's not just our friends, it's how we host strangers. And this is an ancient story from the origins of the Bible, Genesis chapter 28. And I'm not a Christian person, but this is a fundamental story in all the monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And it's the story, I'll just have a look at it here. It's the story of Abraham and the strangers. And Abraham, camped up in the desert with his wife, spied in the distance 3 strangers approaching. And he rushed towards them and said, "Please, please, come and take shelter in my tent, you 3 strangers." And they came in, and he gave them shelter and gave them food. And it turned out that they are angels. They revealed themselves to be angels, and they also revealed that his wife was going to have a baby, which was rather a surprise to them because she was getting on a bit, speaking technically. And this turned out to be true. She did have a baby. And there's a metaphorical level to this story about when you welcome a stranger, they are carrying gifts that they will reveal to you once you have welcomed them. And the gifts may well not be obvious at the first sight. And so in theology, this is a kind of founding story of what it means to be human, is to invite the stranger in, because that's how you begin to help them reveal their gifts, and you can share your gifts with them. And I think this is really fundamental, and it's something we've forgotten, because the welcoming in of strangers is now done by the council or the Home Office or by Priti Patel with a boat hook or something like that. And it's something that we've kind of allowed ourselves to get away from. And one of the big challenges for communities today is how you welcome the strangers. And they may be strangers from just around the corner, or they may be strangers from the other side of the planet. But nonetheless, the need to welcome them remains, particularly if they don't quite look the same as us, or they don't talk the same as us, or they don't eat the same as us, or whatever, you know. So there's a fundamental point which goes back as far as the beginning of humanity about welcoming strangers in all of this. We've got a couple of comments coming in the chat. Let me just relate those. So Lynn says, I talked about this at a senior clinical team meeting work to describe the fundamental difference between service delivery model of care and the compassionate community building work we are also involved in. It's a challenge to the usual ways of the way our organization does things. Absolutely does. And this is why I think this area of community building and hosting is so fundamental, because some people get used to doing it the service delivery way, and that works fine in a service delivery setting. But communities are not service delivery mechanisms. And it's one of the great mistakes that we might be making, is to try and say that service delivery is the only way to do it. Because you get then into professionalized help, and you get the people in the community being treated as consumers and service users, not as valuable members of the community who can contribute and have the important say in how things are done for them and by them and with them. Terry says, if you missed a session with Nigel Gann, who talked about cities of the century, please make sure you see it. Yes, indeed. Fascinating approach where cities are cities of welcome to strangers, regardless of where they're from. Yes, that was our previous call number 13. It's on YouTube. It's on the website. Go and check it out. It was an excellent session. So let's get into what does it mean to be a host then. So this is always the beginning of hosting. Are you going to step forward, or are you going to step back next? Are you going to step forward, or are you going to step back next? And people think that leading is about stepping forward. And it is often, sometimes. But host leading is also about stepping back. Because if it's all about you, I'm stepping forward all the time, I'm the hero, I'm the one who's bringing stuff together, then that's not hosting, that's heroing. And we're going to talk about that distinction in a minute. But you can also lead by stepping back and inviting people to step into the space that you've created. And that's as much leading, because it is leading by engaging and inviting and involving, as well as leading by organizing and creating. And we talk about leaders a lot, and leaders sound like a person, but leading, I want to put it to you, is a relationship, not a role. It's a relationship. In order for there to be leading going on, there have to be at least two people. And I don't want to call the other one the lead. I think that starts to create all the wrong images. But you can see the point. You need to think about the relationship between the people involved. to think about how we lead and how we do leading and what leading means. What I'm going to do is to look at 3 different leadership relationships and see what kind of relationship is implied. 3 metaphors of leadership, very popular ones. Here's the first. The leader is a hero. The leader is the one who always steps forward. And this is as old as humanity as well, and it's not going away. People in the leadership field 20 years ago used to say this is on the way out, but I think developments over recent years have shown that to be disappointingly wrong. The world's got rather keen on hero leaders again lately, which is a bit of a shame. But here we are. It's there, and it's how most people think of leaders most of the time. The leader is the hero. The leader at the one at the top of the pyramid, the one who's getting the information fed up to them, making decisions, getting the instructions sent back down the pyramid, and that's how it works, because the leader has more knowledge, more wisdom, more experience, more strength, can see further from the top of the pyramid. And perhaps in the old days of battlefields with Julius Caesar on them, that's how it did work, because information did flow rather slowly and ponderously, and you needed chains to do it. But these days, the information flows rapidly in all directions, and so this model is increasingly being superseded, I'm glad to say. But let's think about the relationship. If the leader's the hero, then who do you think the other people are? Who are the other people? You want to type in the chat or unmute yourself to say who you think the others are. What does the leader do when they turn up? What does the leader do when they turn? The hero. What does the hero do when they turn up? Well, they save the day, don't they? That's right. Yes. So the other people then are the rescued people. Thank you, Lynn. That's right. So I think the other people are the rescued people. And the difficulty with that is that the role of the rescued people is to do what they're told, be grateful, and not ask too many difficult questions. And this is whether the hero is Batman or the hero is Adolf Hitler or whoever. You get this sort of confluence of people playing along. People wanting to do what the leader wants them, the hero wants them to do, because that's their role. And it's very difficult. It's very dangerous, potentially, if it goes wrong. I mean, if it goes right and it's in a crisis, of course, we're very grateful to the hero. But it's not a sustainable model, particularly not a sustainable model in a community setting. I mean, it's not that good in an institutional setting, but it has, it has been seen to work occasionally there. I'm here to tell you that even in an institution, hosting is a good thing. But so there we go, with the leader being the hero, the others being the rescued people, not a useful relationship, I don't think. Let's look at the second model. This is the leader as servant, which was created by Robert Greenleaf from the United States in the 1970s as a deliberate counterblast to the leader as hero. And the servant, you could say, steps back all the time. You see, here's the picture. The triangle, the pyramid is now on its head. So the leader supports the organization from below. The leader serves the organization. The leader takes their authority from the organization. The leader is helped to their conclusions by the organization. And that's a brilliant alternative to the hero. And I think it's a marvelous model. I wish it was more popular. It's caught on in some areas, particularly areas where people think about service a lot. And that might include church organizations, for example. But so let's look at the relationship again. If the leader is the servant, then who are the others? So once again, do you want to have a think? Put in the chat. If the leader is the servant, then who are the others? Yes, the masters, that's right. That's the classic counterpoint, master and servant. And of course, the question comes, if the leader is the servant, then who's the master? Are the people the master? What's happening? Where's the accountability? What's going on? Who's in charge? And Greenleaf intended this to be a paradox, and he intended us to puzzle over it and think about it. It's a great thing to think about. But unfortunately, many people, particularly those who haven't thought very hard about service, can't be bothered to do that. And so the servant leadership, yeah, too many cooks. That's right, Terry. That's obviously one of the risks, yeah. So while this is a brilliant idea, and I wish it had caught on more, it hasn't. And I think there are some reasons that it hasn't caught on that hosting will address, as we see. So here's our third model, the host, the leader as host. And you see the image here is not a triangle anymore, not like the other two, it's a circle. And hosting is associated, as we saw in the opening of this talk, with circles. But you'll notice that in the circle on the screen now, one of the people in the circle, the one at about 12 o'clock, looks slightly different to the others. So they have a slightly darker kind of tunic in this picture. So the host is one of the group, but they're also not one of the group. And it's a very interesting way of thinking about leadership. And we have the circle, the host, the one who brings people together around something, around a challenge, around an issue, around a desire or a hope. And that's what hosting is about. And if we have the leader as the host, then once again, same question, who are the others? And once again, you can type in the chat if you like. If the leader is the host, who are the others? Yep, that's it. The others are the guests, of course. The others are the guests, and that means an interesting relationship. The others are the guests, and it's an interesting relationship between the host and the guest. It's not a hierarchical relationship. So triangles are about hierarchy, whereas circles are much more about connection and interconnection. And so the host is not sort of in charge of the guests in the correct way, although they are responsible for their safety and they're responsible for providing for them. But the guests also have a role about helping the host to do that and broadly playing along with what the host's inviting them to in the first instance. And it's a much more give and take, ebb and flow sort of relationship that we end up with. And so engaging people with hosting is not like being the director of an organization and issuing instructions. It's much more about reaching out to them with this hand of welcome and invitation. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Now, so let's just take a little pause before we go on to the next step, which is thinking about hosts in a village, and a chance for any observations or questions or thoughts from people gathered here. Just you can unmute yourself or write in the chat if you like. Just a chance to have a little pause before we press on.
Mark?
So yes, so we have.
I'm wondering if the opposite is of host, not the opposite, but the other end of host is traveler. Sometimes. What would the implications be?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the thing that strikes me about that host and traveler is that the host's job then is to help the traveler on their way in a good way, in a good way, you know, and that means not holding on to them forever. Perhaps.
Yeah. What difference will that make to the relationship when we think of leadership?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it seems to me that it would make the leadership, it would make the kind of connection probably transient. Probably this is not going to be a long-term relationship if it's a traveler.
Yeah.
But they might, of course, come back. So it leads to a kind of less hanging on relationship, perhaps. If you
Yeah.
know that
Dynamic was the word that came to me. Yeah.
Dynamic. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yes, that's nice. And you do occasionally read of stories of people who went somewhere, you know, or passing through and ended up staying for 40 years because they liked it there, or they made a connection or something, you know, something happened and they got married or whatever. But you know, those things do happen apparently by accident and coincidence. But yes, interesting with the idea of you're helping people along their way, and that may or may not take a long time, and in the end you must expect probably to wave them goodbye with a good heart. So Lynn says she likes the fact that host is both a verb and a noun. Yes, English is actually very useful in that respect, because quite a lot of words are like that, and you can you don't have to conjugate them either. And sometimes I do workshops in things like French or Russian, where the endings of things change depending on whether they're nouns or verbs, and it all gets terribly complicated. Whereas we can be kind of ambiguous about when we say host. It's both a verb and a noun, which allows us all sorts of flexibility in that. It's a great point. And Terry says it's a good way to deliver a workshop. Yes, absolutely. And thinking about hosting, being a host as a facilitator or trainer or a teacher is a marvelous way to approach those different things. In fact, I've written a book about hosting generative change, which you can also find in all good bookshops. And it looks a bit like that, hosting generative change, with these same 6 host roles that we're going to talk about in a minute. Lovely. So let's go on to thinking about what do we mean by hosts in a village or a village in the city. Well, in the traditional English country village, there were 2 hosts back in decades and centuries ago. There were 2 hosts. There was the landlord of the pub, and there was the vicar of the church. And that's actually a church I used to go to as a child in Suffolk. And between them, they knew everybody. And if they were sensible people, they would work together a little bit as well, behind the scenes. Those people had a responsibility of connecting folk up in the village, dealing with all sorts of different kinds of issues and moments in life. And they very clearly had that role. But if we can move forward, fast forward, now here we are in 2021, the church is losing its power. Fewer people are going to church, certainly in the UK, and around the world, that may be the case in various ways. In a British context, the church is losing its power because people don't go. And the pub is losing its power as well, because the pub has often now been converted into a restaurant or somewhere where people go to eat and do other things, not just to drop in for a pint and a chat like they used to in the old days. And actually, my theory is that central heating was what did for the real old-fashioned community pub, because in the days before central heating, you had to go to the pub to get warm, and there was music and a sing-song and a glass of beer and other people, and there was no telly, and there was no central heating, and there was no drink in the supermarket. So it made all the sense to go to the pub in the evening. But now we have central heating, and we have cheap beer in the supermarket, and we have Netflix, and so the need to go to the pub for recreational activity is dramatically reduced. But both of these can still play their role. But we need different sorts of hosts to come forward now, and that's people like you, people who are village builders in the city, who want to invite people to come together in a good way. And so we're, in a way, we can engage with churches. We had a talk about that. Call number 5, I think, was talking about engaging with churches. And you can, of course, engage. Pubs are very, very useful places too. But they don't probably want to do the community building that we want to do. So here we are. We're going to think about what good hosts do now for a moment. So imagine you're going to host a party. please write down in the chat box. Let's start off with things that you take care to do before the party. And if everyone would like to jot a couple of things down into the chat about which you do there, and then we'll see how it goes. So invite people, we've got, get some refreshments in, excellent plan. Decide the time and the place and the theme. Lynn, yes, thank you. That's the theme is important. What's this thing? What's it for? What are we doing? You know, what's it about? Excellent. Yes. Well, make sure the space is set up. Yes. And this is one of the things we always find. If you talk to people about hosting, they say you get there early and you set the place up, and you make sure the place supports the thing you're going to have. So if you're going to have lots of dancing, you make a nice open space with a flat floor. And if you're going to have a dinner, you have places for people to sit where they can be served. And sometimes you have to have one and then you convert it into the other if you don't have a lot of space. That's right. Yeah. Venue and capacity. Yes, that's right. Yeah, make sure you've got enough space for people who are coming. Prepare something to eat and drink. Yes, Naomi. Naomi, thank you very much. Yeah. Or get people arriving to help you set up the space and cook as part of the process. Yes, absolutely. A different kind of do there, Terry, but completely legit. But if you have to then let people know what to expect. If they think you're going to give them dinner and you think they're going to help you cook it, then you've got a problem. So clarity in the invitation is also a key part. Yes, open the wine. Very good. That's the last thing to do before they start. All right. So let's now move on. We're going to come back and reflect on these things when we look at my 6 roles of a host. So now let's move on to what you take care to do during the party. And that's going to be slightly different because now you've got a room full of people who are doing their thing. So once again, please type a couple of things in the chat about what you take care to do during the party or the event. So connect people and introduce them if they don't know each other, says Terry. Absolutely. Keep the conversation going, says Naomi. Absolutely right. If it needs it, yes, definitely. Good one. Mingle and introduce people to each other. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And this introducing people to each other, it always comes up at this moment, and it's quite correct. And we'll talk about how that's not an institutional move in a minute. And let them know where the loos are. Yes, that's right. Help people feel that at home and feel comfortable to do what they want to do. Securing the knowledge that they know where the loos are and everything else. What else have we got here? Things that you might do. Make sure people know where the food is. Either take their, yes, that's right. Top up supplies. Yes, keep things going. Make sure you've got what the next thing is ready to go. Engage people to speak about themselves and speak about your own experiences. Yes, so there's something about inviting people into conversation, introducing them to each other. Absolutely, and then mingle and joining in as well. And start tidying up. That's the afterwards, Terry. Yes, that's right. Good. So thank you for those starter things. I tackled this by going around for over a decade, meeting all sorts of people who I thought were great hosts and great leaders who acted as hosts, and researching others who were no longer with us. So there's me at the top, and looking a bit younger without my specs on, with my co-author Helen Bailey, who joined me in this project. And there's a few people there who you might be familiar with. Chris Anderson of TED is just below my picture, and I've seen him up close. He's a fantastic host leader. Really works on engaging people at the events that he runs, the TED conferences. Even though huge numbers of people and very famous folk are around, he's a good host leader, I think. There's Chris Bonington, the Everest mountaineer there, who I went and interviewed up his home in the Lake District. And expedition leading is very much like hosting, because you're inviting people to join you and come into a strange and probably dangerous place where you're going to have to work together to survive and get out the other end. And it's a very close parallel, and he was very struck by that when we spoke to him. There's one or two, but there's Ivan Meisner there, a good friend of mine, who is leads BNI, formerly Business Networks International. It exists about bringing people together to share referrals has thousands and thousands of chapters around the world. There's the Bedouins in the desert. And you also see Ronnie Scott down at the bottom left, great jazz saxophonist, who was a very good saxophonist, but he's probably better remembered now for his club, Ronnie Scott's club in London, one of the finest jazz clubs in the world. And it's offered over 60 years a space for British jazz musicians to come together, see visiting stars, connect up, an amazing pivot point. A couple of other people on the bottom row. There is at the left-hand side, Peggy Guggenheim, who was a socialite in New York after the Second World War, very wealthy person. And her hosting role was to connect, she was a great art fan, and she connected the abstract expressionist painters like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, who were poor as church mice at the time, with very wealthy patrons who could support, by their art, support them and then grow their reputation. So she wasn't an artist, but she had an immense influence on 20th century abstract art. And then also at the bottom, Maria Djicheva, who was a Bulgarian. She was the wife of a Bulgarian diplomat, but a fantastic, fantastic connector of people. Very generous, very open connector of people, and was a great help in putting me in touch with many people in this project. So all this stuff that comes out of all these conversations I had, and we started off thinking about what are the rules of hosting, and that's the wrong question. And here's a list of rules. Rules are things you have to do all the time. And there's a list I found on the Santa Cruz beach. No alcohol, no fires, no bikes, no skateboards, no dogs. Don't feed the wildlife and don't have any fun either, probably. So we're not going to talk about rules. Hosting is all about context. So what you have to do changes depending on what's happening. So we went instead for roles. Roles are different ways of stepping forward when you need to. And in our model, Helen and I created these 6 roles of engagement, 6 ways to work to host people. And they are, very briefly, the initiator role, which is about what's the theme of the party, effectively. What's the priority? What are we assembling people around? What's the issue? What's the thing? Then the inviter role, about inviting people to come and join you by reaching out with this soft, I call it the soft power of influence, and the soft power of invitation. And when you invite people, you invite them to potential positive consequences. This is going to be good. And with hard power, which is the power of force and coercion, usually there's potential negative consequences involved. If you don't do this, I won't pay you, I will sack you, I will report you, blah, 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 blah. But hosting is almost always about potential positive consequences. Then we have the space creator, who creates a space where the interaction is going to happen. And that might be a room, it might be online, it might be all sorts of things. But we need a space that will support the kind of interactions we want. And so, for example, a theatre is a wonderful space for lots of people to watch a few people on the stage. It's a rubbish space to have lots of small group conversations with people moving around, because there's no way of moving in a theatre other than stepping on people. So if you want to watch a play, go to have a theatre. If you want to have a kind of interactive conversation, go and find somewhere with lots of movable chairs and set it up in the way you want. It's that sort of thinking that we're talking about. And of course, there's lots of things. How do we make this place look cared for, relevant to the things we want to do, having all those things around the edge like refreshments and relevant materials and ideas. Then there's the gatekeeper role, which is about negotiating the boundaries. What happens when you come into the space? What are the rules and the kind of expectations in the space? And how do we tell people about that? And in the end, potentially throwing people out if they don't, if they consistently don't do that, or that's the last resort, of course. But the gatekeeper role is mostly about welcoming people over the threshold and explaining what happens there. Then the connector role, introducing people, as you all said in the activity just before. not just the host introducing themselves to the guests, but introducing the guests to each other, creating that big level of network. And it's an act of sharing power, is introducing two people to each other, because you're saying your relationship doesn't have to come through me. Now, I know both of you, but here, look, you two should talk because perhaps you have these things in common, or you're both interested in this thing, or perhaps you just haven't met before and it would be interesting to have a word. And what you do is you share your power. You give your power away in a good way, because you create possibility when you introduce people to each other, and then you leave them to get on with it. And finally, the co-participator role is where you join in. When we invite people to dinner, we also eat the dinner. And so as a host leader, you want to be kind of joining in with it as well as organizing it. So my friend Paul here in the West End of Edinburgh is organizing a pavement weeding event. And I very much hope and expect that he's going to do some pavement weeding rather than just get everybody else doing it and then sit on a stool drinking a cup of coffee while we all do the work. So, of course, as a host, you look for opportunities to join in with it as well as do the hosting. So, and in the host book, there's a chapter on each of those, and we could spend hours digging into each of them, but we're not going to do that today because we only have a short amount of time. So these are the 6 roles of a host, and the way those play out depends on the thing you're hosting. But I hope you can see how the things you mentioned in our activity a couple of minutes ago about things like what's the theme, who are we going to invite, setting up the space, welcoming people in, introducing people to each other, mingling around. You know, these are all reflected in these 6 roles of a host. So I think that's that. There we go. So I'm going to stop the screen share, and we have a chance now for questions, reflections, thoughts, and I'm going to throw the floor open to anyone who'd like to make a comment. So there's one which while people are thinking about their questions, there's a few things arrived in the chat. Are some folk natural hosts, Mark? Yes, I think they are, but I think we can all learn how to do it. I think we can. We all have some skill, perhaps tacit knowledge built up, because it was so strange when I went back in 2003 to look for the book and there wasn't one. I realized that this is something we largely do by custom and practice. It's not a formalized thing. How do you host? But I think different people have strengths, maybe strengths in the different roles. But I think we can all learn to do it a bit better. And I hope the roles help us reflect on the different elements, and some things we may be better at, other things we may, not be quite so comfortable with, but we can learn that. And we can also team up with people who are very good at that. That's a very powerful thing to do. Lynn often also says devolving power invites trust and involves risk. Yes, that's right. The connector thing. Yes, you never quite know what's going to happen, but it's such a useful thing, and so often it produces something useful. And Terry's saying, I found at events when I can't remember someone's name, I ask people to introduce themselves to each other. It works a treat. Yes, definitely. So, and there's so many ways you can look at this idea of leading as a host. So Lynn says one person can move through all the roles fluidly, or a group of individuals can hold them between them. Yes, for sure. For sure. And you can also, over time, gradually recruit people into it as well. Yes. So Terry says, it's interesting that when I'm hosting, I find it easy to network. When I'm not, I turn quite shy. Absolutely. I do the same. And the odd thing is, Ivan Meisner, founder of BNI, who's like apparently one of the world's most outgoing people, is also rather shy, and he finds exactly the same thing. And so his technique is, if he's not the host, just pretend that he is. Walk up to people as if you're the host and introduce yourself and invite them to introduce themselves, and that's his thing. Think of yourself as the host. It's a very powerful powerful way of tackling things, and I've used that myself plenty of times. Anyone like to unmute themselves and have a thought or a question? Or Terry, Lynn rather. Lynn.
Hi everyone. I've been involved for the last 13 months as part of my job at the local hospice in developing compassionate communities, which is essentially an aspect of the hospice to engage in an inside-out way. So again, alongside our service delivery models, we're also beginning to work in a much more co-creative way with our communities. And a project we've been involved in since the get-go has been to work with local people who would normally volunteer for the hospice, come into the hospice and do tasks that were allocated to them. But we've developed a project whereby we get interested people and we devolve the power by light touch training and support so that they can actually accompany people living in their communities who have a life-limiting condition. And we're about to present at the Hospice UK conference in November. And organically, what's grown up as the topic of our poster has been, essentially, it's called from hospice volunteer to compassionate citizen, devolving the care and power.
No.
And it's been a wake-up call in terms of when we devolve power and we trust the people that we devolve it to, and we co-create what we're creating. These people are more than capable of doing that work, but they don't see themselves anymore as volunteers for the hospice. So ironically, what you said, Mark, we've led, but we've also stepped back.
Yes, well, that's fantastic.
It's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, and it won't have escaped your notice that hospice comes from the same root as host, as does hospital.
Yes.
So hospitality and hospital and hospice all come from the same root as the word host. It's about hospitals that used to be, back in the medieval days, the place where you were invited in and made comfortable, because that was about all they could do.
Exactly. And ironically, the more specialized we've become and the more professional we've become, we've almost lost touch with the very reason we came into being.
Yes. Yes, I think you say the same in hospitals as well sometimes.
Yeah,
very professional places now, but they're not all that welcoming sometimes. Although of course there are exceptions and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and now you can get courses on learning to be compassionate.
It seems slightly curious, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Other thoughts, reflections, questions? It's nice to see you, Naomi, by the way. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry, I would like to thank you about this conference. I know the English also because some people perhaps that doesn't know me. I am Spanish, and John told me about your conference, and I decided to come because it's a really interesting thing. I am very sociable people. I haven't done any of these projects, of course, but I feel like a host sometimes with people that I know, and I can understand what you are speaking about and how can you feel to be the best leader, as you said. And thank you about this meeting.
Well, thank you, Naomi. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for joining us today. Well, folks, we're just about out of time for today. I hope this has been an interesting introduction to the idea of hosting in terms of community and why it fits so well into the circle ethos of community. I think it also fits quite well into the triangle thing of institutions, but then I think I want to make institutions more like communities anyway. I think that would be another good thing. So thank you all for coming. Do join us on the Village in the City project, which is villageinthecity.net. And also we have a interactive community that you can join from there, which is free, where you can share. We have about 70 members at the moment, and you can share stuff, connect up with our future calls, get involved with workshops and training modules, and connect with other people who want to try and make the world a better place through building local neighborhood, micro-local communities. So thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you next time.